The morning of my retirement party, I was standing at the window of the Riverside Grill's private banquet room, watching the parking lot fill up with cars I recognized. Neighbors, old colleagues, family friends who'd driven hours to be there. 41 years. That's how long I'd run Henderson Mechanical, a commercial HVAC company I'd built from a single service van and a second-hand toolbox in Dayton, Ohio. And today, my son was supposed to stand beside me while I handed him the keys. Literally and figuratively, I should have been the happiest man in that room. Instead, I was frozen at that window, holding a glass of water I'd forgotten to drink, because 3 minutes earlier, I'd heard something that rearranged every memory I had of the last decade. I'd stepped out of the banquet room to use the restroom down the hallway. On my way back, I passed the small coat closet near the side entrance, the kind with a louvered door that doesn't quite muffle sound. I heard my son's voice first, low, almost a whisper, but I'd spent 40 years learning to hear what was wrong in a machine before it broke down. I stopped without thinking. "After tonight it's done," he said. "He signs everything over at the dinner. The lawyer's already set it up. By Monday, I control the accounts, the contracts, the whole operation." A pause. Then his wife's voice, quieter but unmistakable. "And he has no idea." My son laughed. A short, flat sound I didn't recognize. "He thinks I'm doing him a favor, saving him from himself. The old man's been slipping for 2 years, and he doesn't even know it. Tonight's his goodbye party. He just doesn't realize how permanent the goodbye is." I stood there in that hallway for what felt like a very long time. Then I walked back into the banquet room, found my seat at the head table, and smiled at every single person who came to congratulate me. My name is Richard. I'm 67 years old. I grew up in Springfield, Ohio, the second of 4 kids, and I learned early that nothing comes without work. My father repaired appliances out of the garage. My mother kept the books for 2 other small businesses just to keep us fed during slow seasons. I watched them build something from almost nothing, and I decided by the time I was 19 that I was going to do the same thing. Henderson Mechanical started in 1983 with me, a van, and a commercial refrigeration license. I slept on an air mattress in the office for the first 8 months because I couldn't afford an apartment and a business simultaneously. I chose the business. By year 3, I had 6 employees. By year 10, I had 40. By the time my son Marcus was born, Henderson Mechanical was servicing commercial properties across 3 counties and turning a profit I'd never dreamed possible during those air mattress nights. Marcus grew up inside that company the way some kids grow up inside churches or farms. It was the backdrop of every story, the answer to every "what does your dad do?" question. The place he spent summers learning how to read blueprints and talk to clients. I was proud of that. I thought I was giving him something my father never had the chance to give me. A foundation. A head start. A future that was already halfway built. His mother, my wife Carol, passed away from cancer when Marcus was 24. That was 11 years ago. It broke both of us in ways we never fully discussed. The way men in my generation tend not to discuss those things. I threw myself back into work. Marcus did too. And somewhere in the grief, I think I mistook his presence for closeness. He came into the company full-time after Carol died, started in operations, moved into client management, then into the executive role I'd been quietly grooming him for since he was old enough to shake a client's hand. By the time he was 35, he was running day-to-day operations while I focused on the long-term contracts and the financial relationships I'd spent decades building. It felt like the natural order of things. Father builds it, son carries it forward. His wife Diane came into the picture about 6 years ago. She was smart, polished, the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday and always said the right thing at the right moment. I liked her. I trusted her. The way you trust someone who has never given you a specific reason not to. I see things differently now. What I didn't understand, standing in that hallway with my water glass sweating in my hand, was how long it had been going on. The slow, careful repositioning. The way Marcus had started CCing the company attorney on emails without mentioning it to me. The way Diane had begun attending our quarterly dinners with clients. Not as Marcus's wife, but as someone who seemed to already know the details of deals I hadn't briefed either of them on. The way my office had been reorganized twice in the past year while I was traveling, And each time, certain files had migrated to Marcus's desk for easier access. I'd noticed all of it. I want to be clear about that. I'm not the oblivious old man my son apparently believed he'd been managing for 2 years. I'm the man who built a 41-year company by paying attention to the things other people assumed weren't worth watching. But I hadn't confronted any of it, because I'd been telling myself a story. The story was, Marcus is stepping up. Marcus is being responsible. This is what succession looks like. You raised him for exactly this. Don't be the father who can't let go. That story was easier to believe than the alternative. The coat closet ended the story. I sat through 4 hours of that retirement party with a smile that I think was convincing. I shook hands. I hugged old friends. I gave a speech about legacy and gratitude and the kind of future you build not just in concrete and contracts, but in the people you trust to carry what you've created. I watched Marcus's face while I said that last part. He was nodding, looking proud, looking like exactly the son I'd always wanted. He was very good at it. I'll give him that. At the end of the night, when the caterers were stacking chairs and the last guests were drifting toward the parking lot, Marcus appeared at my elbow with his arm around my shoulder and a folder in his other hand. "Ready to make it official, Dad," he said. "Gary's waiting in the back room, just the transfer documents. Same ones we went over last month." Gary was our company attorney. Or rather, he'd been my attorney. I had a feeling, based on what I'd heard, that he'd been someone else's attorney for a while now. "You know what?" I said. "I think I'm gonna hold off on signing tonight." Marcus's arm stayed on my shoulder, but something in it went slightly stiff. "Dad, we've been planning this for months. The timing will still be fine on Monday," I said. "I'm tired. It's been a long day. Let me sleep on it." He looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then he smiled. "Of course, whatever you need." I drove home alone that night. I sat in my kitchen for 2 hours without turning on any lights. I thought about Carol and what she would have said. I thought about the air mattress in the office in 1983. I thought about the 41 years that lived between those 2 points, and the company that existed because of every decision I'd made in that space. And then I thought about what I was going to do next. I didn't call Marcus on Sunday. I spent the day making phone calls to people he didn't know I was still in contact with. My original business attorney from the first 15 years, who was retired but still sharp. A financial consultant I'd worked with in the 90s, who owed me a favor from a situation I'd helped him navigate. And my younger brother, Dale, who'd worked in corporate law for 30 years before retiring to Asheville. By Sunday evening, I had a clearer picture than I wanted. Marcus and Diane had been consulting with a separate attorney for 14 months. There'd been conversations, documented ones, about the best legal structure for a management transition that would give Marcus operational and financial control, while my name remained on the company as a figurehead. The word Gary's paralegal had apparently used, according to a source I'd rather not name, was comfortable retirement. The plan was designed to keep me comfortable. Quiet. Out of the way. The documents Marcus had wanted me to sign at the party were not the same documents we'd discussed in our planning meetings. I hadn't read them closely enough the first time. I'd trusted my son and my attorney, which is either a character flaw or simply what fathers do. But when Dale reviewed the copies I photographed on my phone, he spent about 4 minutes reading before he called me back. "Richard," he said, "if you'd signed this, you would have retained your title but surrendered all voting rights and financial authority, effectively immediately." I sat with that for a long time. "Comfortable retirement," I said. "That's one way to put it," Dale said. I called Marcus on Monday morning and asked him to meet me at the office before anyone else arrived. He came in at 7:15, looking relaxed and carrying 2 coffees, which struck me as either confident or oblivious. I decided it was confident. We sat across from each other at the conference table, where I'd signed the lease for our first real office space, back when Marcus was in elementary school and used to draw on the whiteboard while I ran meetings. I put the folder on the table between us. "I want to talk about what I heard on Saturday night," I said. He looked at the folder, then at me. He didn't ask what I meant. That told me something important. What followed was the most painful conversation of my life. And I've had some painful conversations. What started as deflection, "You misunderstood, that's not what I meant." Diane and I were just talking through contingencies. shifted, as I laid out what Dale had found in the documents, into something quieter and more honest. The kind of honesty that comes when someone realizes the performance is over. "I've been doing everything in this company for 2 years," Marcus said finally. "You've been semi-retired whether you admitted it or not. I thought it made sense to make it formal, to protect the company." "From me," I said. He didn't answer. "I want you to say it out loud," I said. "The thing you said in that coat closet, about the old man not realizing how permanent the goodbye was." He looked at the table for a long time. When he looked up, something had shifted in his face. Not guilt exactly, but a kind of exhaustion, like a man who'd been carrying something heavy and had finally set it down. "I thought you were losing your edge," he said. "I thought if I didn't move, you'd hold on too long and run it into the ground. I told myself I was protecting the company, protecting your legacy." He paused. "I told myself a lot of things. Did you believe any of them?" Another long pause. "Parts of them, at first. And now." He didn't answer that either. But the fact that he didn't deny it, the fact that he stayed in that chair instead of walking out, told me that some part of my son was still in there. The part I'd been parenting since before he could read, the part that knew the difference between what was convenient and what was right. I wasn't ready to trust that part yet, but I wasn't ready to bury it either. I told Marcus I would give him 1 year, not the 6 months I'd initially considered. The comments of 100 imaginary observers in my head kept saying 6 months wasn't enough, and for once I agreed with them. 1 year. Starting from that Monday morning, during that year, he would continue running day-to-day operations, but I would return to an active financial and strategic role. We would restructure the leadership agreement with a neutral attorney, not Gary, who I asked to step aside, and build a succession plan that had been reviewed by both Dale and my original business attorney. During that year, Marcus would have to earn back what he'd nearly taken. I also told him that Diane would need to step back from her unofficial role at the company. That was non-negotiable. If the marriage was going to hold, and that was his business, not mine, it needed to be separate from Henderson Mechanical. He nodded. He looked like a man being handed something heavier than a punishment. A mirror, maybe. "What if I don't meet your expectations?" he asked. "Then we'll have a different conversation," I said. "But that's not what I'm planning for." He was quiet for a moment. "Why are you giving me this, after what I tried to do?" It was a fair question. I thought about Carol, the way she used to say that the hardest part of loving someone isn't forgiving them. It's deciding they're still worth the effort of forgiving. I thought about the 41 years and the air mattress, and the fact that for all of Marcus's calculation, he was still sitting across from me, not walking out the door. "Because you're my son," I said, "and because I didn't build this company to watch it destroy both of us." That year was not easy. There were weeks where the tension in the office was something you could feel in the air, the way you feel humidity before a storm. There were conversations that ended with doors closing harder than necessary. There were moments where Marcus would suggest something, and I would disagree, and we would both have to sit with the fact that disagreement no longer came with the comfortable assumption of trust underneath it. But there were other moments, too. About 4 months in, we lost a major contract, a hospital system in Columbus that had been with us for 9 years. The client's new facilities manager wanted to rebid everything. Marcus stayed at the office until midnight 3 nights in a row, rebuilding our proposal from scratch. He called me at 11:31 of those nights, not to update me, just to think through a pricing model out loud. I sat in my kitchen in my bathrobe, and we talked for an hour about cost structures and client relationships, the way we used to when he was first learning the business and still thought I knew everything. When we won the contract back, Marcus sent the news to the whole staff in a group email. He CC'd me first. 6 months in, he came to me on a Friday afternoon and put a folder on my desk. It was a record of every internal communication he and Diane had had with Gary over the previous 14 months. The ones that documented the transition plan I hadn't known about. He'd compiled it himself. "You should have the full picture," he said. "All of it. Not just what Dale found." I looked at the folder. "This doesn't help your case." "I know," he said. "That's why I brought it." I kept the folder. I didn't open it for another 2 weeks. When I did, I read every page. It was hard reading. Not because of the legal maneuvering, which I'd already understood, but because of the timestamps. The plan had started 8 months after Carol died. Right at the moment when I'd been at my lowest, and Marcus had been, I thought, my greatest source of stability. I don't know what to do with that, entirely. I think I'm still working on it. The year ended on a Tuesday in early spring. I drove to the office early, the same way I had on that first Monday, and sat at the conference table. Marcus arrived at 7:15 again. No coffee this time, which somehow felt more honest. I had 2 documents in front of me. One was the new succession agreement, drafted by neutral counsel, reviewed by Dale, structured to give Marcus increasing authority over a 5-year graduated timeline, with clear milestones and mutual accountability clauses. The other document was a personal letter I'd written and rewritten 6 times, which I didn't show him. I signed the succession agreement. Marcus signed it too. We shook hands across the table where I used to draw on the whiteboard as a small boy, and I thought about how much distance there was between that image and this one, and how much of that distance was my doing as much as his. Then I said the thing I hadn't said in the year of difficult conversations. I owe you something too, I said. I handed you a company to run, and then refused to admit that's what I'd done. I kept one foot in the door for years after I should have either fully committed or fully stepped back. That's not fair to you, and it's not fair to the company. I told myself I was being a good mentor. I was being afraid. Marcus looked at the table for a moment. When he looked up, his eyes were wet in a way I hadn't seen since Carol's funeral. I should have come to you, he said, when I thought you were slipping. When I was scared the company was going to fall apart, I should have said it to your face instead of. He stopped, instead of everything else. Yes, I said, you should have. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry I've been waiting for that sentence for a year, not to feel vindicated. I'd let go of that somewhere around month 4. But because the sentence meant my son was back in the room, fully, without the performance. Just Marcus, and just me and 41 years of a company that had survived both of us. I know you are, I said. Henderson Mechanical is still standing. Marcus runs it now with a level of engagement I hadn't seen from him in years, maybe because the weight of it is finally real, not theoretical. He calls me twice a week. Sometimes about business, sometimes just to talk. Diane is no longer involved in any professional capacity, and I'll be honest, the marriage had a difficult year, and I don't know everything that happened there. That's their story to navigate. I go into the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I review the long-term strategy. I drink bad coffee from the machine in the break room that I've been meaning to replace for a decade. Sometimes I sit in the parking lot for a few minutes before I go in, the way I used to when the company was young, and every morning felt like a bet I might lose. It still feels like that sometimes. I think that feeling is the honest one. I'm not a man who believes everything happens for a reason. I've lived long enough to know that some things just happen, and you decide what to do with them afterward. But I do believe that the worst moment I'd experienced in 41 years of building something turned out to be the moment I stopped coasting on the story I'd been telling myself about my son, my company, and what I'd actually built between us. The thing about building something over a lifetime is that you assume you know every corner of it. Every stress fracture, every load-bearing wall. You forget that the people inside the building are building things too. Their own fears, their own calculations, their own stories about who you are and what you can handle. My son thought I was a man who couldn't handle the truth. I spent a year proving otherwise, and I think, if I'm honest, that I spent the year before that giving him reasons to believe he was right. Neither of us was who we thought we were. That's the part I hold on to. That morning at the retirement party window, watching the parking lot fill with cars I recognized, I thought the story was almost over. 41 years building to a tidy handoff, a nice speech, a chapter closing with everyone applauding. The coat closet showed me the story was just getting to the part that mattered. I'm 67 years old. I've got Tuesdays and Thursdays and bad coffee and a son who calls me twice a week. I've got a company that still has my name on the door, and a succession plan with 5 years of runway, and enough built-in accountability that neither Marcus nor I can pretend the hard conversations are necessary. If you're watching this and you're somewhere in the middle of your own version of what I just described, holding a story together that maybe doesn't quite fit anymore, watching someone you love behave in ways you're choosing not to see, I just want to say this. You already know. The question is just what you're going to do with it. Whatever you decide, I hope you do it while there's still time to build something new from whatever remains. In my experience, that window stays open longer than you'd expect. You just have to be willing to walk back through it. Don't forget to subscribe to vt-sweetrevenge for more real stories about the moments that test us and the people we find on the other side of them. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment. I read everyone. And I'll see you in the next one. There's a version of this story where I sign those documents at the party, shake everyone's hand, and drive home believing I'd done something generous. I would have woken up the next morning with a different company, a different future, and a son I never really knew. That version almost happened. It almost happened because I'd spent years choosing comfort over clarity, telling myself a story about Marcus that was easier to live inside than the truth. What I've come to understand is that the choices we make quietly over a long stretch of time are the ones that build or erode everything, not the dramatic moments, not the confrontations, the quiet choices. The time I noticed something off and decided not to ask. The time I let a reorganized office pass without comment. The time I trusted a document because trusting it was easier than reading it. Each of those small decisions created the conditions for what almost happened at that retirement party. That's not blame, that's just how it works. What we allow, we invite more of. Marcus made his own quiet choices too, and here's what I've learned about people who build elaborate plans to take what they believe they're owed. Somewhere underneath a plan is a fear. In Marcus's case, I think the fear was that I would never truly let go, that he would spend the rest of his working life standing in the shadow of something I refused to put down. He didn't handle that fear with honesty. He handled it with strategy. That's a failure of character, and it cost us both something real. But a failure of character is not the same as the absence of character. The difference matters. The thing about integrity is that it can't be inherited. I built Henderson Mechanical. I couldn't build Marcus's sense of right and wrong for him. I could only model it and hope it took root. When I sat across from him at that conference table and refused to walk away, I wasn't being naive. I was making a bet on something I had seen in him before the fear and the calculation took over. A man who brings you the evidence against himself has not lost his moral compass. He's just been a long time finding it. Intelligence without ethics is a tool with no handle. It cuts the person holding it as often as it cuts anything else. Marcus is a sharp man. He always has been. But sharpness in service of the wrong thing is worse than uselessness. It's dangerous. What the year after that party gave him, what I hope it gave him, was the understanding that his mind and his capabilities are worth exactly as much as the character they're attached to. Not more. That equation doesn't change regardless of how much you earn or how well you run a company. What it gave me was something I hadn't expected, a clearer picture of my own part in all of it. Resilience isn't just about surviving what other people do to you. It's about being honest enough to see what you contributed to the situation you're trying to survive. I was a man who built something real and then flinched at the moment of passing it on. That flinching had consequences. Owning that wasn't comfortable. It was necessary. Richard Henderson is 67 years old. He goes to the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He drinks bad coffee and reads contracts and sometimes sits in the parking lot before he goes in. Just long enough to remember that everything worth having took longer to build than he expected. That's not a sad ending. That's just what it looks like when a man decides to keep going with his eyes open.